Pans Purse here. So, I have had a very fun weekend just now, along with a good number of other people over on the Silver Forum. I took some time out on my Saturday to go and visit the London Coin Fair. The London Coin Fair, if you aren't familiar with it, is... Well, frankly, you can take the words London Coin and Fair and you already have a pretty good idea. Lots of sellers selling lots and lots of very pretty, very interesting, and occasionally eye-wateringly expensive coins. Now, actually, one of the things that I really like about the coin collecting hobby is that it's reasonably straightforward to get hold of interesting bits and pieces, even if you're on a bit of a budget, such as the piece I'm going to be looking at today. So, what's in the purse? So, today we have, if I can get this here, a 5 Bolivar piece from Venezuela. Flipping it over, you can see it's got a sort of shell-back design, very reminiscent of the silver crowns from the United Kingdom. You can see Estados Unidos de Venezuela, 25 grams of 900 purity silver from the year 1900. And this chap on this side is not actually El Presidente of Venezuela from the time. This is chap Simón Bolivar, who was a very important revolutionary leader. He was instrumental in the establishment of not only Venezuela, but also Colombia, Ecuador, and indeed Bolivia, which bears his name, as independent states free from the rule of Spain. This was all around the beginning of the 19th century. So a very, very important figure in Latin American history and very highly venerated, hence naming their currency after him. Now, the time that this coin was actually minted, 1900, was a bit of an interesting period of Venezuela. Venezuela has a bit of a history of dictators, strongmen, and generally people who aren't that keen on, the ideas of democracy, etc. Simón Bolivar himself actually was kind of instrumental in popularizing this kind of view of the world. He saw politics as being something that would tend to divide people, whereas what they really needed was unity, which was certainly what he believed in at the time. And not just unity within Venezuela, he actually led a coalition of Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, and at the time basically was essentially ruler of most of northern Latin America. But anyway, so 1900 was about 100 years after Bolivar, when the country was instead under the rule of a chap called Castro, who was not that Castro. This is a different chap by the name of Cipriano Castro, who, even by the standards of Venezuelan dictators, was not a particularly nice chap and not a particularly competent chap. Shortly after his rule, around the time that this coin would have been minted, was the time of the so-called Venezuelan crisis. This was basically where Venezuela essentially annexed a neighbouring country, and the United Kingdom stepped in to intervene, and Venezuela basically appealed to the United States, saying, asking them to invoke the so-called Monroe Doctrine. This is a doctrine that basically says that it's okay for the United States to intervene within its sphere of influence, particularly if it's preventing European powers from pursuing sort of colonial or neo-colonial goals. The upshot being that there was actually quite a cordial and quite a kind of formal series of essentially peace talks orchestrated by the United States. So, a bit of an interesting time in that history, and obviously afterwards the Monroe Doctrine became a very important kind of cornerstone of US foreign policy. Venezuela, to this day, is an interesting and somewhat troubled country. Most people viewing this, I presume, will have heard of Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez, bit of an interesting one. He came to power in the late 1990s, enacted a series of, kind of very well-intentioned social reforms, access to healthcare, limits on the price of important things like food and fuel. etc. But unfortunately this also led to some quite severe financial difficulties for the country later on, and to the point where currently it is in a very interesting state. Hugo Chavez, also notable because he at one point hosted a weekly television show entitled Allo Presidente, which sounds kind of nice and fun on the face of it, but then of course that's also what Vladimir Putin does on an annual basis. He has kind of this big marathon phone-ins where people can phone in and talk to him. All of which is getting a little off topic, but I am going somewhere with this. So recently the Venezuelan government has actually floated the idea of creating a state-backed cryptocurrency. And when I say state-backed, I don't just mean in the same way that fiat currencies are state-backed, but I mean as in nominally this will be backed against actual resources, most notably oil. Venezuela is a very, very oil-rich nation, which makes its current financial difficulties even more inexplicable. Is that a fair thing to say? Anyway, needless to say, it's a complicated issue, and it's a country with a lot of very interesting but also quite complicated and somewhat troubled history too. So, this I thought was a very interesting little silver coin. It's 900 silver, and just gonna see if I can hold up the microphone for a little ding. Very pretty coin too. I mean, I have to say the portrait of Bolivar is I would say kind of, it's all brow and nose really, isn't it? It's very similar, or strikes me as similar to the portrait used of the Queen on some of the Canadian currency, you know, the Beavis and Butthead. But I do like the back of it. Overall, quite a nice little thing, kind of a nice weight, nice size, and has an interesting bit of history with it too. Bolivar, I should also mention before I forget, may also be a familiar sounding name to some people, not because of any kind of international or historical politics, but rather because Bolivar is one of the names of the lead character of the Stainless Steel Rat series of novels by Harry Harrison. James Bolivar de Gris, the Stainless Steel Rat himself, the sci-fi future by the standards of the 1970s, bank robber, misogynist, thief, whiskey drinker, and generally all-round sort of good egg / anti-hero. So, there we go. A silver 5 Bolivar piece from Venezuela. And I am very happy with that, and as I was saying before, you can engage in this kind of a hobby without too much of a budget. So this, for example, its spot price for that would be less than 10 quid or so, I think. And I paid about 15 for this, which, all in all, for, you know, a nice coin with a bit of history about it, I'm very happy with. So there we go. That's what's in the purse this week. What do you think? Also, as some of you may have noticed, this is my first ever YouTube video, so please be gentle. I appreciate I've touched on some interesting historical and political issues, so please keep any comments in the comment section civil, and remember that you're speaking to actual human beings out there.